All right, welcome to another episode of DevOps Fundamentals. In this episode, we're going to talk about application performance monitoring and availability monitoring. I'm Thiago Almeida, as usual, at NZ Thiago, and this is David.
David Teslar, Senior Technical Evangelist at DTZAR.
Great. Not DTSAR.
Yeah. I don't know who's made that mistake. Anyway. All right, so DevOps. Again, we kind of beating the drum here in case you're just watching this standalone. But DevOps, you're going to have your developers, operations, and other people who are involved in delivering value throughout the entire chain, all the way through the entire application life cycles, which is what we are showing you here. Now, for monitoring, not surprisingly, typically it's going to be involved in the monitoring and learn phase of the application development lifecycle. That being said, I think it's also important to point out that some of these concepts, such as application performance monitoring, can absolutely be applied before you hit production, and in some cases that is recommended, right? So ideally, if you find performance problems before you go to production, that would be a good thing.
Yeah.
So there we go. Okay, so how does application performance monitoring fit, and what does that mean? So application performance monitoring and availability monitoring can be included as what we're calling DevOps practices. And that helps to bridge the gap in terms of how you can think about which type of technologies are involved for any particular thing. So there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different products that can enable availability and application performance monitoring. For what we're going to talk about today in Microsoft solutions, the two major ones that we have are Application Insights, which is what we're going to cover today, and then System Center also has an application performance and availability monitoring subsystem inside of itself, which we're not going to cover, although the concepts are exactly the same.
Yeah, and there's one DevOps idea or concept that people talk about a lot is to measure everything, and also have the teams that are involved with a specific deployment or a specific feature that you're implementing, they're responsible also for what's running in production. So that makes people very interested in knowing specific details of who's using their solution in production, how it's behaving, and etc. Because ultimately you're going to be responsible. You're going to be in the team that's responsible for any problems that happen in production, or if you got to a phase where you want to test different options of deployments, then you would want to know how one compares to the other, and we're going to cover that in the advanced monitoring, advanced topics episode. And this definitely Application Insight, System Center, and the overall application performance monitoring falls into that.
Okay, so what is application performance monitoring? Well, at a high level, application performance monitoring typically is going to involve some form of agent running on your application in production, which is what you saw the little cog there running. That then is going to in turn submit information up to some form of monitoring service. That little agent is sending data, sending information about all kinds of various things about that application running in that environment. And you can set up alerts, notifications, all kinds of other things with that monitoring service to let you know, hey, there's a problem, or oh, performance is slow, something's going wrong, and then give you that rich kind of data that you need to help try and resolve issues. So this is naturally going to give you a lot better idea of detecting and remediating things. I think this is a really good one on the people side to enable and help developers and operations work together. Because quite often you find organizations that ops just handles it, right? If you're in a traditional non-DevOps org, dev kind of codes, throws it over the wall, ops does all this stuff, and then ops has to really do the brunt of the work and figure out, is it code, is it infrastructure? What's the problem? Well, APM will really help you to determine that much faster, right? Because you can tell and say, well, is there a performance problem, and analyze the infrastructure, or possibly even get down to a code level line of where there's a delay or an issue, and that way you can more quickly remediate issues that you have inside of your environments. It also, likewise, it doesn't have to be only for for detection of problems, right? You could have instances where maybe you just want things to be a better performance, or it might be something that you're over or underutilizing some of the underlying infrastructure resources that you have. So for instance, you've got way too big of an instance compute size and you're overpaying. So it can help you to really optimize those resources as well as another byproduct or benefit of implementing APM. And so naturally, in terms of ways that you could help to measure if you went ahead and implemented this, if you were detecting or measuring, I should say, mean time to detection and mean time to repair, and availability all kind of tie in the same concepts. Those are things that you should notice an improvement in if you implement the application performance monitoring.
Cool. Yeah, and when we talk to customers that have implemented this, one other benefit that they see is quite often they find out that there's a problem before their customers do. And they are able, because they have also a process to deploy updates or changes to production quickly, they can also fix that before any customers is actually heavily impacted. Or at least they reduce the amount of customers that are impacted by it.
Absolutely. And again, a second reminder, I'd said this before, but APM I think is a good one that you could use. A great combination is if you use this in conjunction with a automated load performance test in, let's say, a staging environment. And then you have the application performance monitoring agent on there, run the load against it in stage, so you can find those performance problems before you run into production. So it was a kind of a good combination one that's good to think about. Availability monitoring. Now, this is very much not a new concept.
Yeah.
I think everybody's been doing availability monitoring for ages. And it is kind of a bare essential kind of minimum bar for, I'd say, any production application. So we'll kind of talk about the basic here, and of course you're going to have some form of monitoring service. That monitoring service, usually from the outside, you can do some internal monitoring, but somehow it's sitting there checking functionality of the application. Is it up? Is it available? Is it running? And can give you some alerts back to the service and then give you some notifications. That general thing is gonna, if you move forward, it's gonna give you some alerts, some data, gonna give you some basic information, to get your issues resolved faster. The thing that I will say is that there is what I would call really basic availability monitoring. Basic availability monitoring I'll label as something as simple as a ping test or a HTTP 200. 200, okay, right, we're good. But the reality is that things are a lot more complex than that, right? And if you do just the basic availability, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's okay. But especially in a DevOps world, I think you really need to evolve and get more advanced. And so there's what I'll call advanced availability monitoring. And if you're really into what I'm saying as advanced availability monitoring, you're doing things like Tiago's going to show you here, which is that you're doing more advanced things like functional tests for your availability monitoring that resemble a specific set of tasks or things that you want to make sure are working.
Yep.
So for instance, I want to ensure that users can register. And so I'm going to have I'll call it advanced availability monitoring test to ensure that user can log in. And I'm going to run that every 5 minutes, and I'm going to see the performance around the world, perhaps, with that particular test. So that's advanced availability monitoring, and I think that there is a good blend here. We're talking fundamentals, so we don't have time to go extremely in depth here, but generally speaking, having an alignment behind all the way from what is it that we're developing that has new feature functionality that we care about, having that kind of functional test run all the way through your let's say deployment pipeline, all the way up into production where you have perhaps a subset of the Uber set of things that you want to work that you're testing on a regular basis in production. That's advanced availability monitoring, and I would say that's really where more of the DevOps type of practice comes into play, because if it's just HTTP 200, I don't even know if I'd really call that a DevOps practice. I'd almost just call that availability monitoring, that's been around forever, right?
Yeah.
So, all right.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. One thing that, so we have at Microsoft, the product that lights up both of these DevOps practices as well as some others is Application Insights. And I think it's important that you understand how this kind of breaks down, because the one product actually enables multiple DevOps practices. So first up, the thing that you can do with no code modification to your application is outside-in monitoring. And this can be basic availability monitoring or advanced availability monitoring, but it requires zero modification to the application code that you have. At least the way it is today, it does require that it's outside in, meaning from the internet, your application has to be accessible for this to function. And so that's kind of the minimum bar. After that, one of the next things you can do with App Insights is with a simple JavaScript, you can, which is point 2 here, you can just embed that JavaScript. That JavaScript is then going to give you basic kind of information about people that are visiting your, let's say, web application, right? Such as what browser are you using, what operating system are you using, where did you come from, that basic kind of information. So that's kind of the next level, where obviously you would have code modification would be kind of a simple JavaScript that you would put somewhere that is run every single time for across all the app that you want to track. Then you go to, let's say, the next level of depth, and these don't necessarily have to be done in this order, but just to give you an idea. So number 3, this would be developer traces events. And we are going to cover this in more depth in the advanced DevOps module. This is what I would call user telemetry. And you could try and say that 2 is kind of part of that, and I guess to a certain extent it is. But I would say true user telemetry, you're doing some custom detection of what are the users doing. And for that, you're going to have to enable the App Insights SDK and attach that into your product. That's going to enable you to have really full custom functionality in determining what you want to do. And we're not going to cover that in the scope of this module, but the one later we'll get into that more. For 4 and 5, App Insights also enables application behavior and infrastructure performance. So to enable 4 and 5, you do have to enable the agent on the virtual machine. So 4 and 5 really are what I would call the application, or what light up the application performance monitoring. And for that, you do have to have at least the App Insights SDK installed and the agent installed. So it does require the combination of both, but that's going to give you the richest, deep information that really now you're lighting up application performance monitoring. And Tiago is going to show you more a little bit about what that looks like. So App Insights does a lot of stuff, as you can see, and different levels or levers that you can pull to enable different things within App Insights.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. All right, so it's demo time. Let's have a look at some of the stuff that David talked to us about. So here, we're going to go over to my portal. I'll reload that. And while I sign in here, I'm going to go into Visual Studio and show you where you would add the SDK for it. Or at least the first step, you can get a specific amount of JavaScript from your Application Insights bucket on Azure and add it to every page of your website. So that's the basic one. So if I have a look at the website code here, and if I check out the views, and there's the layout.cshtml. This is popular on this type of ASP.NET application because it's inherited by every other page, so you only have to edit once. And I just added that piece of JavaScript there. So it goes out to Application Insights and registers itself against a specific Application Insight bucket that you have. And you can see here, I'm getting the instrumentation key from a configuration file. So instead of having it hard-coded on the site, it's actually picking it up from an environment variable that I'm setting as well. So on the Azure side, if we have a look here on our production app solution for Parts Unlimited, I have that Application Insights account here. And in here, we have quick starts, for example, if you want to learn how to get started. And the JavaScript code that you would add is right there. So this is what I copied and pasted to that layout.cs HTML. And you can see here it has my instrumentation key. The only difference is that I changed that to pick it up from an environment variable. The reason why is because for my website, when I look at the website that relates to this, it is looking for that in the configuration of the web app itself, and then it passes it into application insights. So that's the basic one, and that gives you quite a few things like page view, the duration of the page view, where the users are coming from, which country, for example, and that type of information. And which pages took the longest, the dependencies that it has, and etc. So that's the first one. The next one is the SDK, so the user custom telemetry. So if you go from we have for Java as well and other languages, but from here from ASP.NET, you can go and right click, and there, because I've already configured it, it's already telling me to configure it again. But you can also, and it's showing that I already have it, so it's pretty much configured. But you would have a add application insights option here, and then you would select which application insights you would use. And that basically adds a few references like Microsoft.application insights, so a few NuGet packages that wires up into ASP.NET to get more specific details on which methods are being called, which ones are taking the longest, user sessions, and etc. from the solution.
It's going to give you the custom telemetry, and it's going to give you it's kind of the core foundation for a lot of the plumbing for App Insights.
Yeah.
But yeah, that you could stop there and still get a lot of rich data.
Yeah. So for example, here I saved a favorite search, and this is a custom event that I created. For example, it doesn't seem to have found any, but if it did, then we would see the DO20 entries. So I'll just change the time range here for the last 48 hours, and now we should get a couple of them. So you can see here, these are custom events. So I basically just use this to do a custom user event to say carousel test the DO20, and that says someone clicked on the button that had a 20% off deal.
Yeah,
So
and we'll cover that. We'll cover that more in the advanced DevOps practice module. But that just gives you a rough feel.
Yep. And finally, if you want to add the agent on a virtual machine, if you're running your site on premises or in the cloud or somewhere else, and you want to add it, there's an agent that you download and install, and that starts monitoring IIS and the server itself, and gives you a lot more information here against application insights. For a web app, if you have a web app, so I have this one here, DevOps Fund Web. It's just an extension, a web app extension. So if I go to Tools, Extensions at the end here, you can see that I've already added, once it loads, it'll show that I've added the Application Insights extension. And that basically just adds the agent behind the scenes to the machine that's hosting your web app. And of course, you can add a few more extensions as well.
Yeah, so that the combination of the SDK and the agent is really what's going to light up application performance monitoring and give you all of the rich data on what are your dependencies, what are all the calls, what are happening, what are the errors. If you want to do dump of event logs or traces or things of that nature when certain things happen, that's where you're going to get the full capabilities of App Insights.
We have two more things to show. So one is we can have a look if we go to the original monitoring here, and let me go to the main one here. And if we have a look at the service, the response time, for example, or the server requests, we'll see that it will list the operations that are taking the longest once it loads, and we'll see that there's quite a few interesting ones here that you can monitor. also on the server response, it also gives you a lot more detail. So definitely, there is not just the main page, but you can see all the way drill down into specific calls or specific operations. And you see that there's one specific one, SignalR. I know that it keeps the connection open, so that's why it's going for 9 minutes or 6 minutes. But this one is a bit interesting. It's the get home recommendations, and it's taking 15 seconds to load. So that's a lot more than I expected. If you look at all the other ones, they're all milliseconds. So that gives me an idea to go into the code and have a look at that specific method.
So if we clicked on that home recommendations, maybe we would get just some ideas of the trace or other things that are happening in there. But at a bare minimum, you're seeing that, hey, this page is loading very slowly, and we probably need to investigate because there's 232 people who, on average, are seeing this kind of delay.
Yeah, and on average, it's taking 15 seconds, so that's definitely worth looking into. And these are all the specific occurrences of it. Different times. Some of them take a little bit longer, some less, but it's still in a matter of seconds instead of milliseconds, which is not what I expected from that method.
Well, and this is another case too, where if you're doing just basic availability monitoring, yep, I got a response code of 200.
Yeah.
but it's taken 15 seconds to get something done. So it's really a failure without having APM enabled, right?
Yeah. So what I can do is then go into the code and have a look at that specific method. It's in the home controller, and if we have a look here at recommendations, it is doing a while count and then go into the database to get a specific list. And if we go to the definition of this, it's 1,000 instead of 10 or 1. So that's the reason why it's just looping through, making calls to the database, and then delaying the page from showing. Mm-hmm. So that's one way that you can go all the way from application insights through to the code and figure out why it's failing.
Yeah. And depending on when you're watching this, or what your application's looking like, you may at some point be able to get richer data, even down to the code level line of information stating that this is the line of code that was causing a potential problem. It kind of depends on your exact scenario and where we're at with the product. But yeah, that's also a possibility.
Cool. And then the final one that I wanted to show is availability monitoring itself. So if we go back to the home of my application insights here, at the top we have availability. And this here, what I've created is 2 web tests. And you can create as many web tests as you like. You can add a web test here. And you see that there's a couple of types. One is just URL ping. So you can just give it defaults to the URL of the web app that this is related to, but you can change it to any. And you give it a name, and it's just going to ping that URL every 5 minutes. You can configure the frequency, and you can also choose different test locations. So we have a whole lot of different locations throughout the globe that you can choose from to see. So if you have a lot of customers in Brazil, and you want to make sure that there's no apparent delay time for them to access your site, you can enable this and then tell it to alert you if a number of locations have failed that in that past 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. So you could have different locations throughout the world pinging your site, and if any number of them, like more than 3, report that they took more than a specific amount of time to respond, then it's going to send you an email and let you know that your site is not behaving like you wanted it to. Mm-hmm. So that's the one type. It's the ping one. And it also supports a little bit more advanced type of testing. It's called multi-step test here on the application insights. And what that relates to on Visual Studio is a web test. So here I've created a Parts Unlimited UI tests. I have a Selenium test that I run through the release management part of our solution. But also I created a couple of web tests. So here you can just, when you go and add a web performance test, it's basically going to open up the browser and let me start browsing to it, and then it's going to start recording everything that I do. you see it's already selecting everything that we're loading. So that's what you do. You can do that, and it'll create the test for you. But just to show you, we have this web test general that basically browses through. Oh, cancel this out. It browses through the site and adds a couple of items to the cart. On the Azure side, so if you're looking at the results from this, we can have a look at that specific web test, the general one. Just to show you, you would select a file, and the file that you select is that web test that I just showed, just to complete this part.
So I think I want to pause for a second here because I think this is really important. I mean, I know a number of you likely out there have some department that's doing probably some kind of functional test. I'll just call it a functional test for ease of simplicity. But what Tiago just showed you is really likely, I mean, well, it is a functional test if you have a public-facing website, right? And so this is a way that, you know, you could do that kind of testing, and it doesn't really require much knowledge, right? I mean, you hit the record, follow through those steps. Now, certainly if there are custom things, one thing that Tiago didn't show you is that you can edit these parameters. So if you want to inject custom data or you need to do some kind of authentication, there's different kind of options to modify the web test there, which might, you know, does require potentially some deeper expertise on how complex you want to go with the web test. But right there, you've got an ability to test and potentially, you know, which we're not covering here, automate these things in other places of your pipeline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for this web test, the general one, I've asked it to run from 5 different locations. It browses to the main production Parts Unlimited site, adds a couple of items to the cart, and goes to the checkout. And it's running it from all these 5 locations. And if it fails the threshold of 3 more locations, it will send me the alert. So not only it's monitoring for us, but of course there's alerting built in. Yeah. The other type of alert you can create is your own alerts. So it has a couple of active ones, and these relate to the availability test that I've created, but you can create your own as well. So if there's things that you want to check and get alerted on specific metrics, so even if the process CPU that your application is running on the server goes over a certain threshold and you want to be alerted, you can also enable that for your app. Cool. Yeah, so those are the main demos that I want to show you. There's quite a lot on Application Insights online, so definitely research that as well.
Yeah, so maybe we can pull up the URLs for the resources and close out here.
All right, so like with the other episodes, we have this list of resources for you to go and check out. Check out our other show, DevOps Dimension. It's a pretty cool show that we interview different Microsoft teams and also companies that are we know that are implementing DevOps practices. And then finally, one that we always call out is the DevOps practices hands-on labs with Parts Unlimited. So that's where I got the code for us that we're showing throughout this series, and you can find them at aka.ms/partshol.
Cool.
All right,
Thanks.
that's it for this one. Thank you.